Maya's stomach growled as she walked down the dusty road, her worn sneakers kicking up small clouds of dirt with each step. The backpack on her shoulders felt heavier than it should have, considering it held everything she owned in the world. 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, her grandmother's old Bible, and $47 in crumpled bills. That was it. That was all she had left after 24 years of life. The eviction notice still burned in her memory from 3 days ago. She could still hear Mrs. Patterson's voice echoing in her head, cold and final. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Maya. I'm sorry, but business is business." Sorry, as if that word could fix the mess her life had become. The diner job had been her lifeline for 2 years. Decent tips, regular hours, and the kind of work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. But when the new highway bypass opened, customers stopped coming. Within a month, old Pete had to close the doors for good. Maya remembered the day he handed her that final paycheck, tears in his eyes as he apologized for letting everyone down. She'd tried everything after that. Applied to every store, restaurant, and business within a 50-mile radius. But in a small town like Millbrook, jobs were scarce even in good times. The few places that were hiring wanted experience she didn't have, or skills she'd never learned. The temp agency had nothing. The unemployment office had nothing. Even the gas station had turned her away, saying they needed someone who could work nights. And a young woman alone wasn't safe for the late shift. Maya pulled her thin jacket tighter as a cool breeze swept across the open fields. Summer was ending, and she could feel the first hint of autumn in the air. Soon, sleeping outside would become impossible. She'd already spent 2 nights in her car before the repo man had come for that too. The medical bills from her grandmother's final months had eaten through her savings. Her credit, and any chance of getting back on her feet quickly, the thought of her grandmother brought a familiar ache to her chest. Rosa Hernandez had been the only family Maya had ever known. After bouncing between foster homes throughout her childhood, Maya had found her grandmother when she turned 18. And those 6 years together had been the happiest of her life. Rosa had taught her to cook, to garden, to find beauty in small things. She'd been the one person who believed Maya could make something of herself, but cancer doesn't care about love or dreams or the future plans you make. It just takes and takes until there's nothing left, but medical bills and funeral expenses and the crushing weight of being completely alone in the world. Maya stopped walking and looked up at the wooden sign hanging from 2 metal posts. Broken. Arrow Ranch, it read in fading paint. Private property, no trespassing. Beyond the gate, a long dirt road stretched toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. She could make out a large farmhouse, several barns, and what looked like endless fields dotted with cattle. She'd heard about this place in town. Everyone had stories about Jack Morrison, though most people spoke about him in whispers, like he was some kind of ghost. He'd been a big deal once, a rodeo champion who'd won competitions all across the country. Maya had seen his picture in the diner, back when it was still called Morrison's Cafe and belonged to his family. Young, handsome, confident, with a smile that could light up a room and belt buckles that proved he was the best at what he did. That was before the accident. Maya didn't know all the details, but she'd heard enough. A bull named Destroyer had ended Jack's career in less than 8 seconds. The man who'd walked into that arena had never walked out. What came out was someone else entirely, someone who'd spent the last 5 years hiding from the world on his family's old ranch. People said he was bitter now, angry at life and everyone in it. They said the accident had done more than just break his body, it had broken his spirit too. Some folks claimed he'd become mean, that he'd run off anyone who tried to help him. Others said he was just sad, a man who'd lost everything that mattered to him and didn't know how to find his way back. Maya didn't care about any of that. She cared about the fact that he had land, buildings, and probably needed help running the place. She cared about the fact that he lived alone, which meant he might be lonely enough to consider an arrangement that any sensible person would refuse. She'd been thinking about this for days, ever since she'd overheard Mrs. Chun at the grocery store talking about how Jack's place was falling apart. Shame to see it like that, she'd said to her husband. His daddy would roll over in his grave if he could see what's become of the broken arrow. That boy needs help, but he's too stubborn to ask for it. Maya had an idea then, desperate and crazy as it sounded. What if she could offer him something he needed in exchange for something she needed? She could cook, clean, help with basic ranch work. She was stronger than she looked, and she wasn't afraid of hard work. In return, maybe he'd let her stay in one of those outbuildings. Just until she could get back on her feet, the worst he could do was say no. And if he said no, she'd be exactly where she was right now, which was nowhere. Maya took a deep breath and pushed open the gate. It creaked loudly on rusty hinges, and she winced at the sound. No turning back now. Her feet crunched on the gravel. As she walked up the long driveway, her heart pounding harder with each step, the ranch looked different up close. The main house was beautiful, or had been once. It was a sprawling two-story building with a wraparound porch and big windows that probably let in lots of light. But the paint was peeling, the porch sagged in places, and several of the windows were boarded up. The whole place had an air of neglect, like it was slowly giving up on itself. The barns were in better shape, probably because they were more necessary for the day-to-day operations. She could see cattle in the distance, and there were horses in a nearby pasture. Someone was definitely still working this land, even if they weren't taking care of the cosmetic details. Maya was so focused on looking around that she didn't notice the man until he spoke. "You lost, miss?" She spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. He was standing in the doorway of the largest barn, and Maya's first thought was that the stories hadn't prepared her for the reality of Jack Morrison. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of physical work. His dark hair was longer than it had been in those old photos, and he wore it pushed back under a well-worn cowboy hat. But it was his face that made her breath catch. The left side was a map of scars, raised lines that told the story of his encounter with Destroyer. They ran from his temple down to his jaw, and Maya could see that his left eye drooped slightly, giving him a permanently serious expression, but his eyes, those were the same. Gray like storm clouds, intelligent and sharp, currently studying her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "I'm sorry," Maya said, finding her voice. "I know I'm trespassing. I just I need to talk to you about something." Jack stepped out of the barn, and Maya noticed the slight limp in his right leg. He moved carefully, like someone who'd learned to work around pain. "Talk about what?" Maya swallowed hard. This was it, her one chance to make this work. "I need a job, Mr. Morrison, and I think you might need help around here." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. "I'm not hiring." "I'm not asking for wages," Maya said quickly, before he could turn away. "I'm asking for a place to stay. Room and board in exchange for work. I can cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I won't cause you any trouble." Jack stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Maya could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she waited for his answer. In the distance, a cow lowed, and somewhere nearby, a horse whinnied softly. "Why?" he asked finally. Maya blinked. "Why what? Why would you want to work for nothing? Why would you want to live way out here with someone you don't know? What's your story?" Maya considered lying, making up something that sounded better than the truth. But something in his eyes told her he'd see right through any story she tried. "To tell, because I don't have anywhere else to go," she said simply. "I lost my job, lost my apartment, lost my car. I don't have family or friends with spare rooms. I've got $47 and the clothes on my back, and winter's coming. I need help, Mr. Morrison, and from what I can see, so do you." Jack's expression didn't change, but Maya thought she saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition, maybe? Or understanding. Like he knew what it felt like to be at the end of your rope with nowhere left to turn. "Ranch work is hard," he said finally. "Especially for someone who's not used to it. You'd be up before dawn, working until after dark. It's not glamorous and it's not easy." "I'm not looking for glamorous," Maya said. "I'm looking for a chance." Jack studied her for another long moment, then nodded toward the house. Come on, let's talk. As Maya followed him up the porch steps, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, she'd found her way home. The alarm clock's shrill ring cut through the darkness at 4:30 in the morning, and Maya jolted awake, her heart racing. For a split second, she forgot where she was. Then reality came flooding back. The small cabin behind the main house, the deal she'd made with Jack Morrison, and the fact that her new life was about to begin in earnest. She'd been on the ranch for exactly 1 week now, and every muscle in her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. Her soft hands, which had only known the gentle work of waitressing and caring for her grandmother, were already showing the signs of ranch life. Blisters had formed and popped and formed again. Her palms were rough and stained, and she'd developed calluses in places she'd never had them before. Maya stumbled out of bed and pulled on her work clothes, the same outfit she'd been wearing every day since she arrived. Jeans that were now permanently stained with dirt and hay, work boots that Jack had grudgingly lent her from his collection of old gear, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. She caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror above the dresser and hardly recognized the person staring back. Her face was already tanned from spending long hours in the sun, and her dark hair, which she'd always kept neat and styled, was now pulled back in a practical ponytail that stayed out of her way while she worked. She looked like a different person entirely. Rougher, maybe, but also stronger somehow. The cabin Jack had given her was small but clean. One room with a bed, a dresser, a small table, and a tiny kitchenette. There was a bathroom with a shower that gave lukewarm water on good days and cold water on bad days. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and after sleeping in her car and then on the streets, it felt like a palace. Maya splashed cold water on her face and hurried outside. Jack had made it clear from day one that ranch work started early and ended late. Cows don't care if you're tired, he told her that first morning. They need food and water and care every single day, no matter how you're feeling. She found him in the barn, already feeding the horses. He moved efficiently through his routine, checking each animal, refilling water buckets, and distributing hay. He'd obviously been doing this for years, his movements automatic despite his injuries. Maya had learned not to offer help with the things he could manage on his own. Jack Morrison was a proud man, and he didn't appreciate pity or unnecessary assistance. "Morning," she said, grabbing the bucket of chicken feed from its hook on the wall. Jack nodded in her direction, but didn't speak. That was normal. Maya had learned that Jack wasn't much of a talker, especially first thing in the morning. He preferred to work in silence, and she'd adapted to that rhythm. Sometimes they'd go hours without saying more than a few words to each. Maya made her way to the chicken coop, where 24 hens were already clucking impatiently for their breakfast. She'd been terrified of the chickens at first, convinced they were going to attack her with their sharp beaks and flapping wings. But after a few days, she'd realized they were just hungry and eager, not aggressive. Now she actually enjoyed this, part of her morning routine. "Come on, ladies," she said softly, scattering the feed across the ground. "I know you're hungry. I've got plenty for everyone." The chickens rushed toward the food, and Maya smiled despite her exhaustion. There was something peaceful about this simple task, something that reminded her of the small pleasures her grandmother had taught her to notice. Rosa would have loved these chickens, probably would have named every single one of them. After the chickens were fed, Maya headed back to the house to start breakfast. This was perhaps the most challenging part of her new job. Jack expected 3 meals a day, and they needed to be hearty, filling meals that could fuel a day of hard physical labor. Maya's cooking experience was limited to basic dishes and whatever she'd learned from watching her grandmother. But she was determined to improve. The kitchen in the main house was large and well-equipped, though it showed signs of being underused for years. Jack had been living on canned soup, frozen dinners, and whatever he could throw together with minimal effort. The refrigerator had been nearly empty when Maya arrived, stocked with little more than beer, leftover takeout, and condiments that had probably expired months ago. Maya had spent her first trip to town carefully selecting ingredients with the small amount of money Jack had advanced her for groceries. She'd chosen basic staples that could stretch into multiple meals: eggs, bacon, potatoes, ground beef, chicken, rice, beans, and fresh vegetables. She was determined to prove that she could provide real value in exchange for her room and board. This morning, like every morning, she prepared a simple but substantial breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. She'd learned that Jack ate like a man who would be burning thousands of calories before lunch, and she'd adjusted her portions accordingly. The first few days, she'd made city-sized portions, and Jack had politely but firmly told her that ranch work required ranch-sized meals. She set his plate on the kitchen table and called out toward the barn. "Breakfast is ready." Jack appeared a few minutes later, hanging his hat on the hook by the door and washing his hands at the kitchen sink. He sat down at the table without comment and began eating. Maya had learned not to expect conversation during meals either. Jack ate with the same efficiency with which he did everything else, focused entirely on the task at hand. Maya ate her own smaller portion standing at the counter, already mentally planning the day ahead. After breakfast, she would clean the kitchen, then tackle whatever household tasks needed attention. The house was large and had been neglected for years, so there was always something that needed cleaning, organizing, or minor repairs. In the afternoons, she helped with outdoor work. She'd learned to muck out stalls, repair fences, move hay bales, and assist with basic cattle management. Every task was a learning experience, and every day brought new challenges that tested her determination. To make this arrangement work, the hardest part wasn't the physical labor, though. It was the loneliness. Jack was a man of few words under the best of circumstances, and his injuries had made him even more withdrawn from human connection. Maya understood that his scars weren't just physical. The accident had changed more than just his appearance. It had changed how he saw himself and how he believed others saw him. She'd caught him covering the scarred side of his face with his hand when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd noticed how he turned slightly away when he spoke to her, presenting his unmarked profile. The confident, charismatic man from those old photographs was still in there somewhere, but he was buried under layers of pain and self-doubt. Maya wanted to help with that healing too, but she'd quickly learned that Jack Morrison was not a man who could be rushed or pushed. Any progress would have to come naturally, in his own time and on his own terms. The breakthrough moment came during her second week. On a particularly difficult day when everything seemed to go wrong, one of the horses had gotten tangled in wire fencing and cut his leg badly. Maya had been in the barn when she heard Jack shouting for help, and she'd run outside to find him kneeling beside the injured animal. "Hold his head steady," Jack commanded, his usual calm demeanor replaced by urgent concern. "Talk to him. Keep him calm while I clean this wound." Maya dropped to her knees beside the horse's head, her hands shaking as she stroked his neck. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Jack's going to take care of you. You're going to be fine." The horse was clearly in pain, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Maya had never been this close to such a large animal in distress, and she was terrified that she would do something wrong. But Jack's steady presence gave her courage, and she focused on keeping her voice calm and soothing. "That's good," Jack said quietly, not looking up from his work. "Keep talking to him. Your voice is helping." For the next hour, Maya stayed by the horse's head while Jack carefully cleaned and bandaged the wound. She talked continuously, telling the horse about her grandmother's garden, about the chickens, about anything that came to mind. Gradually, the animal's breathing slowed, and some of the tension left his muscles. When Jack finally sat back on his heels, satisfied with his work, Maya realized that something had changed between them. They had worked together as a team, trusting each other completely in a moment of crisis. Jack had relied on her, and she had risen to meet his trust. "You did good," Jack said simply, meeting her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. "Thunders. Lucky you were here." Maya felt a warm flush of pride at his words. It was the first real praise he'd given her, and it meant more than he probably realized. Is he going to be okay? He'll be fine. Horses heal fast if you take care of them properly. Jack stood up slowly, favoring his bad leg. We should get him into the barn, somewhere clean and dry. Working together, they guided Thunder into an empty stall. Jack showed Maya how to apply fresh bandages and explained what signs to watch for that might indicate infection or complications. For the first time, he was teaching rather than just directing, sharing his knowledge instead of simply expecting her to figure things out. That evening, after dinner, Maya found Jack in the barn checking on Thunder one more time. The horse was resting comfortably and his wound looked clean and properly dressed. The first leaves had started to change color when Maya discovered Jack's secret. She'd been living on the ranch for almost 2 months now, and their daily routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The awkward silence of those early weeks had given way to practical conversations about ranch business, and sometimes, if she was lucky, Jack would share a story about his rodeo days or his family's history with the land, but it was still rare to see him truly relaxed, to catch a glimpse of the man he'd been before the accident changed everything. That's why Maya was so surprised when she heard the sound coming from the old barn on the far side of the property. She'd been heading back from checking on the cattle in the north pasture when she heard it. A rhythmic tapping like someone hammering, but with a different quality to it. More deliberate, more careful. Maya had explored most of the ranch by now, but she'd never been inside that particular barn. Jack had never mentioned it, and she'd assumed it was just storage space for old equipment. Curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly pushed open the heavy wooden door. What she saw inside took her breath away. The barn had been converted into a workshop, and it was filled with the most beautiful furniture Maya had ever seen. Handcrafted chairs with intricate designs carved into their backs. A dining table that looked like it belonged in a magazine, its surface smooth as glass and gleaming even in the dim light. Several smaller pieces lined the walls, each one unique, and obviously made with incredible skill and patience. Jack was bent over a workbench at the far end of the space, completely absorbed in what he was doing. He held a small carving tool in his hands, working on what looked like a jewelry box. His movements were precise and gentle, so different from the efficient, practical way he handled ranch work. This was art, and Maya could see the passion in every careful stroke. She must have made a sound because Jack suddenly looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the workshop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Maya saw a surprise flash across his face, followed quickly by something that looked almost like embarrassment. "I'm sorry," Maya said quickly. "I heard the noise and I was curious. I didn't mean to intrude." Jack set down his tool and straightened up, his expression closing off the way it did whenever he felt exposed or vulnerable. "It's nothing important. Just something to keep my hands busy." Maya walked deeper into the workshop, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a rocking chair that looked like it had been crafted by a master artisan. "Nothing important?" "Jack, this is incredible. You made all of this?" He nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with her praise. "Started doing it after the accident. Had to find something to do with all the time on my hands." "These aren't just something to keep busy," Maya said, her voice full of genuine admiration. "These are works of art. Have you ever thought about selling them?" Jack's laugh was bitter. "Who's going to buy furniture from a broken-down cowboy? Besides, I don't make them to sell. I make them because ... I don't know. Because I need to create. Something beautiful, I guess. Something that isn't broken." The pain in his voice made Maya's heart ache. She understood now why he kept this workshop hidden, why he'd never mentioned his talent. For Jack, this wasn't just a hobby. It was therapy, a way of proving to himself that his hands could still create beauty despite everything that had been taken from him. "Can I watch?" she asked softly. "I promise I won't get in your way." Jack hesitated for a long moment, then gestured toward a small stool near his workbench. "I suppose, but don't expect much conversation. I concentrate better when it's quiet." Maya settled onto the stool and watched in fascination as Jack returned to his work. The jewelry box was taking shape under his skilled hands, and she could see that it would be something special when it was finished. The wood was a rich cherry color, and Jack was carving a delicate pattern of vines and flowers into the lid. "That's beautiful," Maya whispered. "What kind of wood is that?" "Cherry," Jack replied without looking up. "My grandfather planted that tree 60 years ago. Had to cut it down last spring after a storm damaged it, but I saved the good wood." "Seemed like a shame to let it go to waste," Maya smiled. Even in his woodworking, Jack was practical. Nothing was wasted, everything had a purpose and a history. "Who's the box for?" Jack's hand stilled for a moment. "Nobody in particular. I just had an idea for the design and wanted to see if I could make it work." But Maya caught something in his voice, a hesitation that suggested there might be more to the story. She didn't push, though. She was learning that Jack would share what he wanted to share when he was ready, and pushing him only made him retreat further into himself. They sat in comfortable silence for the next hour, Jack working on his carving, while Maya watched and occasionally asked quiet questions about his techniques. She was amazed by his patience and skill, the way he could coax intricate details from a simple piece of wood. It was clear that he'd been doing this for years, developing his talent through countless hours of practice. When the light began to fade, Jack finally set down his tools and stretched, wincing slightly as his injured leg protested. "Getting late. We should head back." "Jack," Maya said as they walked toward the main barn. "Thank you for letting me watch. I know that workshop is private for you." He glanced at her sideways. "You really think the stuff in there is any good?" "I think it's amazing," Maya said honestly. "You have a real gift. Your grandfather would be proud to know his tree became something so beautiful." Jack didn't respond, but Maya caught the small smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was progress, she realized. Another small crack in the walls he'd built around himself. Over the next few weeks, Maya found herself spending more and more time in the workshop. Jack never explicitly invited her, but he didn't tell her to leave either. She would finish her evening chores and then slip into the barn, settling onto her usual stool to watch him work. Sometimes they talked quietly about the pieces he was making, but often they simply enjoyed the peaceful silence together. Maya began to understand that this was Jack's sanctuary, the place where he could forget about his scars and his limitations and focus entirely on creating something beautiful. She felt honored that he'd allowed her into this private world, and she was careful never to take that trust for granted. The breakthrough came on a crisp October evening when one of Jack's prize marais went into labor. It was Bella, a beautiful chestnut marais who was carrying her first foal, and something was clearly wrong. Maya had been helping Jack check on the pregnant marais every few hours, and when they found Bella lying on her side in obvious distress, Jack's face went pale. "She's been trying for too long," he said grimly. "The foal is positioned wrong. I need to help her, but I can't do it alone." Maya's heart started racing. She'd helped with minor medical issues before, but nothing like this. "What do you need?" "Me to do? Hold her head, keep her calm? This is going to be difficult for her, and I need her to trust us." Jack was already moving, gathering supplies and preparing for what would clearly be a challenging delivery. Maya knelt beside Bella's head, stroking her neck and speaking in the soothing voice she'd learned to use with frightened animals. "It's okay, girl. Jack's going to help you. Your baby is going to be fine." What followed was the longest 2 hours of Maya's life. Jack worked tirelessly to reposition the foal, his hands gentle but determined as he fought to save both mother and baby. Maya stayed by Bella's head the entire time, offering what comfort she could while Jack performed what was essentially surgery without anesthesia. "Come on, Bella," Maya whispered as the mare's breathing became labored. "You're so strong." "Your baby needs you to be strong." Finally, just when Maya was beginning to fear the worst, Jack let out a shout of triumph. "Got him! He's coming!" Within minutes, a wet, gangly foal was lying in the straw beside his exhausted mother. Jack quickly cleared the baby's airway and began rubbing him vigorously with towels. And soon the little colt was breathing strongly and trying to lift his head. "Is he okay?" Maya asked, tears streaming down her face without her even realizing. He's perfect," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "And so is she. They're both going to be fine." Maya looked down at Bella, who was already nuzzling her newborn son with gentle wickers of encouragement. The sight was so beautiful, so full of hope and new life, that Maya felt her heart might burst with joy. "We did it," she whispered. Yeah, Jack said, sitting back on his heels and looking at Maya with an expression she'd never seen before. "We did." For the first time since she'd known him, Jack's face was completely open, his usual guardedness replaced by genuine happiness and gratitude. The scars were still there, would always be there, but they seemed irrelevant in that moment. All Maya could see was the joy in his eyes and the smile that transformed his entire face. "I couldn't have done that without you," Jack said quietly. "You were incredible tonight, Maya. Bella trusted you, and that made all the difference." Maya felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "We make a good team, yeah," Jack said, his smile growing wider. "We really do." As they watched the newborn colt struggle to his feet for the first time, Maya realized that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer just employer and employee or even just friends. The first snow came early that year, falling in thick, heavy flakes that covered the ranch in a blanket of white silence. Maya woke up to find her cabin windows frosted over and the world outside transformed into something magical and peaceful. She'd always loved snow, but living in the city, she'd never experienced it like this, where it stretched endlessly across open fields without a single building or streetlight. To break the perfect white expanse, what she hadn't expected was how completely the storm would cut them off from the outside world. By the second day, the snow was 3 feet deep and still falling. The road to town was impassable, the phone lines were down, and even Jack's old truck couldn't make it past the front gate. They were completely isolated, just the two of them, and the animals they cared for. "Storm like this can last for days," Jack told her as they stood on the porch, watching the snow continue to fall. "Good thing we stocked up on supplies last week." Maya nodded, but inside she felt a flutter of nervousness. Not about being snowed in, exactly, but about what it would mean to be trapped in such close quarters with Jack for an extended period. Over the past few months, their relationship had grown from wary cooperation to genuine friendship, but there were still moments when the air between them felt charged with something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. She'd caught herself watching him more often lately, noticing things that had nothing to do with ranch work. The way his hands moved when he worked with the horses, gentle and sure. The rare moments when he smiled, really smiled, and his whole face lit up. The sound of his laugh when she told him stories about her grandmother's cooking disasters. Maya had tried to push these feelings down, telling herself that getting romantically involved with Jack would be a mistake that could ruin everything she'd built here. But feelings, she was learning, didn't always listen to common sense. The first day trapped inside wasn't too bad. They had plenty to keep them busy, checking on the animals, making sure the generators were running properly, and clearing snow from the barn doors. Maya cooked elaborate meals, grateful to have extra time to experiment with recipes, and Jack spent hours working on his latest woodworking project. But by the second day, the comfortable routines they'd established began to feel different, more intimate somehow. They found themselves lingering over meals, talking about things they'd never discussed before. Jack told her about his childhood on the ranch, about the dreams he'd had before the accident changed everything. Maya shared stories about her years in foster care, about the loneliness she'd felt before finding her grandmother. "I used to think I was broken," Jack said one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside. "After the accident, like something essential had been torn out of me, and I'd never be whole again." Maya looked at him across the flickering firelight, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. "What changed your mind?" Jack met her eyes, and Maya felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. "You did. Having you here, working alongside you, watching you face every challenge with such determination. You made me remember what it feels like to be part of something again." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them quite knew how to handle. Maya felt her heart racing, and she could see her own feelings reflected in Jack's eyes. The careful boundaries they'd maintained were starting to blur, and she wasn't sure if that was wonderful or terrifying, before either of them could say anything more. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness except for the glow from the fireplace. "Generator must have gone out," Jack said, his voice rougher than usual. "I should go check on it." "Jack, wait," Maya said, reaching out instinctively. Her hand found his arm in the darkness, and she felt him go still under her touch. "It's too dangerous to go out there now. The wind is too strong. We can check it in the morning." For a moment they stayed frozen like that, Maya's hand on Jack's arm, both of them acutely aware of how close they were sitting. Then Jack carefully pulled away, and Maya heard him stand up. "I'll get some candles," he said. "And more wood for the fire." Maya wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm room. She'd crossed a line tonight, and she wasn't sure if Jack was pulling away because he didn't feel the same way, or because he was as scared as she was. Of what those feelings might mean, the third day brought a different kind of tension. Jack was polite but distant, throwing himself into physical work with an intensity that seemed designed to avoid being alone with her. Maya tried to act normal, but she could feel the strain between them growing with each passing hour. It all came to a head that evening when Maya was washing dishes and accidentally knocked over a glass, sending it crashing to the floor. She knelt down to clean up the pieces, frustration and confusion making her movements clumsy. "Careful," Jack said, appearing beside her with a broom. "Let me get that." "I can handle it," Maya said, more sharply than she intended. "I'm not helpless." "No, you're not helpless," Jack replied, his own voice tense. "I was just trying to help." Maya stood up, glass still in her hands, and turned to face him. "Were you? Or were you just looking for another excuse to avoid talking to me?" Jack's jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means. Ever since the other night, you've been acting like I have some kind of disease. Did I say something wrong? Do something wrong?" "Maya, don't what? Don't ask why you're suddenly treating me like a stranger? Don't wonder why you can barely look at me." Jack set the broom aside and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Maya had learned meant he was struggling with something. "You don't understand? Then explain it to me," Maya said, her voice rising. "Because I thought we were friends, Jack. I thought we trusted each other, but apparently I was wrong." "Friends?" Jack's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Is that really what you think this is?" "I don't know what this is anymore," Maya shot back. "You tell me." For a moment they stared at each other across the kitchen, both breathing hard, both clearly fighting emotions they didn't know how to handle. Then Jack took a step closer, and Maya saw something shift in his expression. "You want to know what this is?" he said, his voice low and intense. "You want to know why I can't look at you without thinking about how much I want to touch you? Why every time you smile at me, I forget how to breathe? Why the thought of you leaving this place terrifies me more than anything else in my life?" Maya's heart stopped. "Jack, I'm in love with you, Maya," he said, the words coming out like a confession torn from his soul. "I'm completely, desperately in love with you, and it scares the hell out of me because I know I don't deserve you. I know you could do so much. Better than a broken-down cowboy with more scars than sense." Maya stared at him, shock and joy and disbelief warring in her chest. "You think you don't deserve me?" "Look at me, Maya," Jack said, his hand moving unconsciously to touch the scarred side of his face. "Really look at me. I'm not the man I used to be. I'm not the man you should be with." "You're right," Maya said quietly, and she saw Jack flinch. As if she'd struck him. "You're not the man you used to be. You're better." Jack's head snapped up, confusion replacing the pain in his eyes. The man in those old photos was confident and successful, but he was just a boy playing at being a man. Maya continued, taking a step closer. "The man standing in front of me has survived something that would have destroyed most people. He's built a life out of nothing, created beauty with his own hands, and opened his home to a stranger who had nowhere else to go. That man is stronger and kinder and more worthy of love than any rodeo champion could ever be." "Maya," Jack whispered, and she could see tears gathering in his eyes. "I love you too, Jack," she said simply. I love your strength and your gentleness and your stubborn determination to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. I love the way you care for your animals and the way you create beautiful things in your workshop. I even love your scars, because they're part of the story that made you who you are." Jack reached for her then, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, Maya, there's no going back. I won't be able to pretend anymore that I don't need you like I need air to breathe." Maya smiled through her own tears and rose up on her toes to close the distance between them. "Then don't pretend." When their lips met, it was like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Everything that had been building between them for months finally found its expression in that kiss, and Maya knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. But even as she lost herself in Jack's embrace, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Love was wonderful, but love was also complicated. And Maya still had secrets, still had parts of her past that could destroy everything she'd built here. As the storm continued to rage outside, Maya pushed those worries away and focused on the miracle of being held by the man she loved. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was exactly where she wanted to be. She just hoped it would be enough when the real test came. Maya woke up to the sound of sawing coming from Jack's workshop. It had been 3 days since she'd run away into the storm. 3 days since she'd left Jack standing in their kitchen after he'd poured his heart out to her. 3 days of the worst misery she'd ever experienced, even worse than when her grandmother died. Because this time the pain was entirely her own fault. She'd spent those days at the small motel in town, surviving on vending machine food and her own tears, trying to convince herself that leaving was the right thing to do. Jack deserved better than someone who brought nothing but complications into his peaceful life. He deserved a woman who could love him without reservation, without the shadow of unpaid debts and legal troubles hanging over her head, but lying awake in that cheap motel room, listening to the highway traffic and missing the sound of wind through the trees. Maya had realized something important. She wasn't protecting Jack by leaving. She was protecting herself from the possibility of being hurt again, of losing another person she loved. And that wasn't fair to either of them. So she'd used the last of her savings to settle her debts. She'd sold her grandmother's jewelry, the only valuable thing she owned, and paid off the landlord who'd been threatening legal action. It had taken everything she had, but for the first time in months, she was truly free of her past. Now she stood outside Jack's workshop, her heart pounding as she listened to him work. She'd tried the house first, but it was empty, and she'd known instinctively where to find him. When he was upset or working through difficult emotions, Jack always turned to his woodworking. Maya took a deep breath and pushed open the workshop door. Jack was bent over his workbench, focused intently on a piece he was sanding. He must have heard her come in, because his hand stilled, but he didn't look up. "I wondered if you'd come back," he said quietly, his voice carefully neutral. "I almost didn't," Maya admitted. "I thought maybe it would be better for both of us if I just disappeared." Jack finally looked up then, and Maya's heart broke at the pain she saw in his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and there was a hollow quality to his expression that reminded her of how he'd looked when she first arrived at the ranch. "Why did you leave?" he asked. "Was it something I said? Did I push too hard?" Maya shook her head, tears already starting to fall. "No, Jack, it wasn't anything you did. You were perfect. Everything you said, everything you did, it was perfect." "Then why?" The confusion in his voice was almost worse than the pain. "Help me understand, Maya, because I've been going crazy trying to figure out what went wrong." Maya walked deeper into the workshop, her fingers trailing along the furniture he'd made. Beautiful, solid pieces that would last for generations. "Because I was scared. Because I thought my problems would destroy what we'd built together." "What problems?" Jack stood up, setting down his sandpaper. "Maya, whatever it is, we can work through it together. That's what people do when they love each other. The landlord from my old apartment has been threatening to sue me," Maya said, the words coming out in a rush. "He wants money I don't have for damages I didn't cause." I've been running from that debt since before I came here, and I was terrified that if he found me, if he caused trouble, it would reflect on you. On the ranch. Jack stared at her for a moment, then let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh of relief. That's it? That's what you're so afraid of? Jack, you don't understand. Legal troubles, court cases, people asking questions about your business, about why you're harboring someone who… Maya. Jack's voice was firm but gentle. Stop, just stop. He walked over to her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Do you really think I care about any of that? Do you think some landlord from the city is going to scare me away from the woman I love? But what if… No what ifs, Jack said, pulling her closer. You could have told me about this months ago, and we could have dealt with it together. You don't have to carry every burden alone anymore. Maya looked up into his eyes, seeing nothing but love and determination there. I settled it, she whispered. I sold my grandmother's jewelry and paid him off. I'm free of it now, but I used everything I had. I'm broke again, Jack. I have nothing to offer you. Jack's smile was soft and full of wonder. You have yourself? Maya, that's everything I need. He led her over to his workbench where she could see what he'd been working on. It was a beautiful oak hope chest, the wood polished to a warm glow, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers decorating the lid. Maya recognized the design from the jewelry box he'd been making that first day she'd discovered his workshop. I started this the day after you left, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. I told myself I was just keeping busy, but I think I was really trying to hold on to hope. Hope that you'd come back. Hope that we could make this work. Maya ran her fingers over the smooth wood, overwhelmed by the beauty of it and what it represented. It's gorgeous, Jack. What's it for? It's for us, he said simply. For all the dreams we're going to build together. All the memories we're going to make. Maya felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Jack, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do, Jack said firmly. You deserve every good thing life has to offer, Maya, and I want to spend the rest of my life making… Sure you get them? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maya's heart stopped as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. I know this is fast, Jack said, his voice shaking slightly. I know we've only known each other for a few months. But Maya, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old with you on this ranch. Maya stared at the ring, then at Jack's face, seeing all the love and hope and nervous excitement there. Are you sure? Are you really sure this is what you want? I've never been more sure of anything, Jack said. You brought light back into my life, Maya. You made me remember what it means to be happy, to have something to look forward to. You're my partner, my best friend, my home. Will you marry me? Maya thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The desperate night when she'd shown up at his gate with nothing but the clothes on her back. The slow building of trust and friendship. The gradual healing of two wounded hearts. The love that had grown between them, strong and sure and unshakable. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jack, yes, I'll marry you. Jack's face lit up with a joy so pure and bright that Maya felt like her heart might burst. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled her into his arms and spun her around the workshop, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. 6 months later, Maya stood in the kitchen of their home, her hand resting on her growing belly as she watched Jack through the window. He was in the corral with Thunder, the colt they'd helped deliver. Training him with the same patience and gentleness, he showed everything in his care. They'd been married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, with half the town in attendance. Everyone had come to see the woman who'd brought Jack Morrison back to life, who'd coaxed him out of his isolation and reminded him how to smile. Maya had worn her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Jack had worn his father's best suit. It had been perfect in its simplicity. The ranch was thriving now. Jack's furniture business had taken off after Maya convinced him to display his work at the local craft fair. Orders were coming in faster than he could fill them, and they'd had to hire help to keep up with demand. Maya had discovered a talent for training horses. And they were building a reputation for producing calm, well-trained animals. But more than the business success, it was the joy in their daily life that mattered most. Jack smiled easily now, his laugh coming frequently and naturally. The shadows that had haunted his eyes for so long had lifted, replaced by contentment and hope for the future. Maya had found not just a home, but a purpose, a partnership that fulfilled her in ways she'd never imagined possible. Their baby was due in the spring, and they'd already started work on a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms. Jack was building a beautiful crib, of course, carved with the same care and love he put into all his work. Maya spent her evenings knitting tiny blankets and dreaming about the child who would grow up on this ranch, surrounded by love and wide open spaces. As she watched Jack work with Thunder, Maya marveled at how much their lives had changed. She'd come to this place desperate and broken, trading herself for shelter because she had no other choice. Now she was Mrs. Morrison, a beloved member of the community, a successful businesswoman, and soon to be a mother, but most importantly, she was loved. Completely, unconditionally, passionately loved by a man who saw her worth even when she couldn't see it herself. Jack had given her more than just a home and a future. He'd given her back her belief in herself, her faith in tomorrow, her understanding that family wasn't about blood relations but about choosing to build something beautiful with someone who truly saw you. As Jack looked up and caught her watching him, his face breaking into that smile that still made her heart skip a beat, Maya placed both hands on her belly and smiled back. They'd built something extraordinary from the ashes of their broken pasts, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most desperate,